Like now, we're live. Welcome to Reformgelical, where the Reformed and Evangelicals meet. I am co-hosted by the great AD Robles. AD, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Oh, that's great. I'm doing pretty well. I'm a little tired.
Yeah.
The newborn life. But other than that, I'm doing good. And
who's this guy? Who's this beast in the middle here?
I don't. You hear about Zoom calls where people just like hack into our meeting, and this guy just hacked in. I don't know. Who are you?
Well, they call me El Capitan. But Eric Conn.
Eric Conn.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're here, man. In all seriousness.
Me too.
Welcome to the show. Eric Conn has a podcast. You have a website. Tell us a little bit about that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on ericconn.com. That's ERICCONN.com. And you can follow me podcast-wise on the Hard Men podcast. You can find that on Apple, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. And there we talk about all things masculinity. And we are working on recovering biblical masculinity in a world of softness.
I love it. That's such a good tagline. So you talk about working out a lot? Is that kind of what you hit on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the biggest deal about my show is being a gym bro and how awesome that is. I'm trying to keep up with AD, but he's got excellent gym bro status, so it's hard to do that.
For sure. Sometimes he flexes and I just get intimidated. I don't know what to do with myself.
Oh, man.
He
go ahead.
He got me into bloat maxing, so that's where I'm at.
Bloat maxing. Do you know what bloat maxing is, Matt?
No, I do not. Please.
Okay, bloat maxing is when, this is the best thing ever. I love bloat maxing. Bloat maxing is when, like, you see those guys that are just like, they're kind of fat, but they're just beastly. Like, there's so many muscles, but they're kind of fat too.
Yeah.
That's bloat maxing.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Well, I highly recommend, Eric, your podcast. It's fantastic. I will listen to a few last week, and man, it was a real blessing to me. We wanted to have you on the show because you've been spitting fire on the social media and having a lot of great tweets, Facebook posts. And there's some things that I think are really worth unpacking on here. One of them, I don't even remember when you sent this. Oh, July 3rd, right before July 4th. And you kind of laid out some steps of action items to take. AD shared this with me. It's like, man, we got to have this guy on the show, which I told you beforehand, but I'm going to tell the rest of the world that AD never recommends people. It's always me thinking, hey, we should have these people on. But so you should take that as a high honor. So I feel like AD and I, we kind of do a lot of counterpunching, playing defense, responding to the craziness that is happening in the world. But this was kind of encouraging for me because it's more of an offensive plan for us to take on. And what you said is there are strategies for mobilizing among Christians and places we can win now, which, living in the culture we do, we love things now. We don't want to wait 2 generations. And 4 of those points you hit was anti-fragile households, Christian businesses that disciple and employ our men, recruiting others to homeschooling, and planting anti-fragile churches that aren't woke. And what I want to do first is to go through these 4, because these are meaningful action steps that we can take now. And in a lot of ways, we need to take now. And it's part of being obedient to what God's called us to. So the first one is anti-fragile households. What do we need to do to have an anti-fragile household? And what is an anti-fragile household?
Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal question. And yeah, just to why this tweet came about, a huge part of it was looking at, I was actually reading a biography on Stonewall Jackson. And if you look at the Battle of Manassas, the South was getting their butts kicked. Mm-hmm. And
you're canceled.
So yeah, Stonewall Jackson, I know, exactly. He was white and he was Christian. We're out.
That's right.
So yeah, no, what I saw was you're in the middle of this battle, the South is getting their butt kicked, and everybody's tucking tail and running. And Stonewall Jackson gets his name, Stonewall Jackson, because he stands and he fights. And not only does he stand and defend, but he actually takes the fight to the enemy. So you can find a lot of these principles in Doug Wilson's book about Reformation, Rules for Reformers.
You said the name.
Maxine just caused me to seize up. I know.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's this idea that actually I think right now is the best time to attack. It's the best time to form strategies and be on the offensive, because this is the time when the enemy does not expect it to come. They think that we're tucking tail and running. And I think there's a few places that we can win. And so thinking strategically about those. So number one was the anti-fragile household. Fundamentally, an anti-fragile household is a household that gets stronger in times of trial and affliction. So everybody right now, we're in the midst of the shamdemic. There's economic crisis. There's all these things going on. And it's been my mission to say, look, we can actually get stronger during this time. We need to have faith, and we need to work, and we need to have strategies to do that. And again, the household that will actually get stronger in the midst of adversity.
Yeah, I noticed that depending on how Christ-centered I'm running my household, the better I'm equipped to do that. And what I mean by that is the more I'm leading my family in daily devotionals, starting the morning praying, having some scripture verses, throwing in some catechism, teaching my kids, purposely leading them. Those are the times, the seasons in my household where when we do have those kinds of adversities, we are more anti-fragile. We are more equipped to respond appropriately and to counter. But there's the times where I'm not doing that. I'm just tired. I'm like, oh, I'm busy. Work is a lot. And I just, I'm going to sleep in a little longer. I'm not going to do my devotionals. We're just going to skip. The kids are going crazy. And you get into this routine where you're not doing those things. And I find that those are the times where I am defenseless and unable to do that. Are those the kinds of things that you're talking about when you're building up an anti-fragile household?
Yeah, I think that certainly that's going to be central, is your faith and being a covenant keeper, being a law keeper through the power of the Spirit, your faith in Jesus Christ. And then I think it gets into very practical things. So I kind of, break it down into a few of these things. Number one is you need to be a debt-free household. So part of the problem with households in Christianity, the church, and the culture today is they're not effective because they're enslaved to people. And financial debt is slavery. So what'll happen generally is you get all these car payments, things like this. Then you're enslaved to the bank. And then what do you do? Well, you have to work a corporate job because that's how you pay for all this stuff. And you're not really living for the gospel. You're not able to be bold and take, actually in faith risk because of all this debt and the slavery, etc. So that's number one. You need to be free of debt. Number two, what I would say is bringing productive property back into the household. If you want to experience true freedom, you've got to actually be financially free on the debt side, but then also, where do you get your money? Do you own your own business? Can you be productive within the household? So helping people kind of figure that out. And then the other one that I would put in anti-fragile households is recovering biblical sexuality and the roles for the household. So this starts with father rule, looking at Titus and Timothy. Okay, well, father rule is what results then in, wives are in the house taking care of the children. This is their God-ordained role. We look at where our culture is, and we're talking about building a multi-generational vision for the future and the recovery of the church. Well, we need to be looking 3, 4, 5 generations down the road, and central to all that is the household. It has to be.
Amen. Yeah. So when I saw that tweet, I took that first one to mean the practical side of this, because yes, obviously, you need to be in the Word, you need to be doing what you're supposed to be doing spiritually for your household. But Matt, your whole show, I think, is about more of the practical side of this. Is about business, about economics and stuff like that, where a lot of people don't really see those as spiritual issues. They definitely are, but a lot of people don't see it that way. The way I took it was, you're not fragile when you don't have to compromise yourself to because you get a paycheck. You know what I mean? Like I can't tell you how many times I've gotten emails that say, "Hey man, I'm so glad you're doing this because I can't say this." And I always respond to those the same way. You can do it. You just need to figure out a way to not be dependent on this check, this thing that you think you're dependent on. I think the social justice movement, and that's my whole thing. So I always bring it back to that. It thrives based on the premise that you need them. You need their cash. You need their jobs. You need their approval. And it's a lie. You actually don't. But so many people feel that way. And some households, the way that their finances are, it kind of is that way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't realize that your business and your self-sufficiency, your entrepreneurship, the money that you have is a spiritual issue until you start talking about things like, hey, you need to take a stand against face masks, or you need to take a stand against the Marxism, the racism, or the sexism, or the pro-LGBTQ message that's going out. And when I talk about it on my podcast, because I do have a business podcast and talk about it from a business context and what you should do in the workplace, the number one objection is not that, oh, those things are not bad. It's, well, I might get fired. I have a family to provide for. I have a house. Like, what am I going to do? And you don't realize how ineffective you become as a Christian if you're kind of pursuing the American dream instead of the Great Commission, where you are loaded up on debt, where you are dependent on one stream of income, where you don't have money saved up, that you're house poor. I mean, that's a big thing in California and New York. I'm not so sure about Colorado or wherever AD lives. But those things have spiritual significance. And we think of them in a physical, tangible way and think, oh, that's not spiritual. But they're so tied in together. It's important. It's critical to not be anti-fragile in the household.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And part of the issue, and AD has touched on this a lot with his show, but having been a pastor, part of the reason these issues are not being addressed with critical race theory, social justice causes, intersectionality, is because these pastors went to seminary and they have debt and they're dependent on rising up in these denominations. And if they don't do that, and if they don't play the game, and if they speak out against it, they are going to lose funding. They're going to lose their jobs. And then all of a sudden you've got a very, very real problem where you can't speak the truth, not necessarily because you don't believe it, but because it would cost you your job. It would cost you, going up in the denomination. And I think a lot of these guys, look, especially, it's not just the young guys, but the older guys that are counting on a PCA pension or whatever it is, man, they don't want to jeopardize that. They can't.
Right.
So again, this is why I think part of anti-fragility for pastors, and one of the things that I've discovered is, look, I'm going to have side gigs. I'm going to have side hustles where I can pull an income.
That's
and
right.
then when the elders come to me and they say to me, hey, you're not going to be preaching that, I said, you can fire me. I'll keep preaching it.
That's right.
We have to put ourselves in that position.
Amen. And a lot of these guys too, this is a very practical thing. A lot of these guys, and it's not a bad thing necessarily, but they live in parsonages, so they don't even own their home. And so they're reliant on these pensions, and they're reliant on essentially not rocking the boat too much. And it's really difficult position to be in, to put a lot of these guys have a lot of kids too, because they're Christians. Christians have a lot of kids. And so it's like, man, like, I don't want to put my family in danger. And that's a good thing, that you shouldn't want to put your family in financial danger. But I'm almost to the point, Eric. I mean, I'm not going to say this is a hard and fast rule, because I don't make up scripture, but I'm almost to the point right now where it's like, I wouldn't suggest anyone take a pastoral job unless they were tent making. You know what I mean? At this point in America, because it's just too risky,
Yeah, no. I'm with you on that one. I think that, look, different time periods, you look at the early 1800s in America, the pastor was sort of the center of society, the Jonathan Edwards type person, the Cotton Mather. People looked up to them and respected them in a way that they were saying some pretty bold things, and they were allowed to do that. But I think the way the culture is today, some of the most hostile people against bold gospel preaching, especially if you're preaching the whole counsel, you're going to preach the principles from the Old Testament and the whole Word of God about every issue of life. Yeah, the most hostile people are going to be church. And you have to have that anti-fragility in order to preach that way. Otherwise, yeah, you're putting your family on the street. Most of these pastors do have families. So I would tell guys, first of all, don't go to seminary. and don't get debt. First of all, everybody at seminary, for the most part, are getting woke. In the 10 years since I've been there, it's just gone downhill. They are bad, bad, bad. And so why would you get all this debt? And again, the debt is going to enslave you to each of these pastoral jobs anyway. You don't need that. Work another job. Study with pastors, study with faithful men. You can be equipped and trained for the ministry. There's different ways to do it. You do that, and then you have this other side gig, side hustle. And for me personally, I won't give it up. Churches have said to me, "Hey, come be our pastor, but we want you to do it full time, no side gigs." I say, I won't do it.
Yeah, that's really wise. You think the person that exemplifies this the most, funny enough, is Kanye West. He has built such a career for himself, even though he's Christian late to the game. But like, that's what we're talking about. Maybe it's not to the scale of what he's at, but he's at a point in his entertainment career, in his clothing career, is that what it is, in his business, where it doesn't matter what he says. He's a free man. And it doesn't matter if he puts a Trump hat on or he takes it off. He's provided for his family. And it doesn't have to be to that extreme. Obviously, we're not preaching the Joel Osteen gospel here, but there is a place to get to where you could have an emergency fund built up that 5 to 6 months where you could recover, where you could feel and have that independence to be a free person, where you're not dependent on that kind of a thing, or on any kind of single income. Now, I just need to take a break here because this question has been bothering me ever since it was asked. Missed the beginning. Who is with you, Eric? This is our show. How is Eric?
Yes.
You know,
Mike,
you have
Mike
a
knows
good
what he's
guest
talking
on.
about. Mike is a very wise man.
Oh, that's humbling.
That's my pastor,
Oh, it is? Okay.
Pastor Mike.
Uh,
Yeah. Who are these two guys with you? Oh, bearded one?
Yes, this is our show, Pastor. It's our show.
We've got quite a few questions here, Matt. What do you got for them?
You're the social media guy. I mean, yours is supposed to be the one fielding these.
All right, I got one. So, Michael Foster, how much food are you storing in your beard?
Deep theological questions.
At least 3 days worth.
3 days.
Because if you're in the grave for 3 days, you need to be able to eat. The squirrels are not going to sustain you. So
You
3
live in
days.
Colorado,
And
man.
most
You
of
don't-
that, by the way, is grease. Grease is high in calories.
It's consistent with our theme of being prepared, you know?
Oh,
All right.
man.
So the second point that
That's
you put
right.
on ways that we could strategize for mobilization and win now. The second one is Christian businesses to disciple and employ our men. Speak to that.
Yeah, so I think it ties into what we said about pastors, that, look, you have to have sources of income and productive property that, say maybe the pastor works in this job, maybe it's the other men in the church. But one of the big issues that we're facing in America is corporate America is increasingly hostile to the Christian working man. So even the Marine Corps, you've seen it the last couple of weeks, absolutely everybody is posting, their logo and a rainbow flag, whatever it is.
That's
Okay. So you're going to have to find ways to generate income that can come outside of that. And I think one of the really smart things to do, and there are people who are doing this right now, is you can generate income through particularly the trades. Because if you're in the trades right now, and I've done a lot of work in them, from fencing to excavation to utilities and stuff like that, most of the trades are very blue collar. They're generally right-wing-ish, so they're more sympathetic to Christianity. And like if I was working my job as an electrical contractor, the guy on site, the foreman on site, absolutely does not care what my social media platform says.
Right.
I mean, I could say almost anything and he doesn't care. But the problem becomes when I'm working for these corporations, which I've done, you see this all the time on Twitter, people getting doxxed. They figure out where you work, they post it on there. Can you believe this? This person likes the South, or this person likes Jesus, or this person said homosexuality is wrong. Like, you'll get fired for it.
No
So
question.
I think it's having that aspect of, like, Christians can start businesses. They can run those very, very well. And you can sort of operate outside the PC intersectionality garbage that's going on in corporate America. And then I think the other part of that is look, in our church, it's a good example. We have all these young men, my sons, other people's sons, and you're looking at them and you're saying, okay, men need to work, and they need to go in the workplace, and they need to be discipled. And one of the best ways they're going to be discipled is on the job with fathers. Well, the problem is, can I send them to go work, marketing firm that's pro LGBT? Right. I mean, even Chick-fil-A now is like, oh my gosh, so this gives us avenues to raise our men in our contexts and not have to give in to that.
Yeah, that's good. I think also when we say you're starting businesses in these industries, I think that could be overwhelming for some people. Like, you can start a plumbing business and just be your own guy and just be a one-man business and make good money. You can make good money as an excavator, a backhoe operator in construction, and have your own business where it is your own business, but you're not having to think about, oh my gosh, I need to get like employees now. I need HR. I need an accounting department. Like, starting a business in these trades, one, you could do it without getting a college education. Two, you could just do it yourself and be the boss and employee. And that is not an intimidating thing. It might sound it from like saying you're starting a business, but really we're just talking about working for yourself. And yeah, there are business skills you need to learn to work for yourself, but it's not like this. You need to learn how every aspect of business works and scale a corporation. It could be as simple as just being your own boss.
Yeah. And let me say this, I'll jump in here too, because I've been thinking a little bit about this, because I've got 3 sons and I've got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And every book I read with my kids, it goes through the town, the different jobs in the town, and they've got the policeman, the fireman, the baker, the construction worker and stuff like that. All these kinds of jobs that, like, I grew up, I don't know about you guys, but I grew up kind of, my teachers would tell me that's like what you do when you don't go to college. Like, that's what the losers do. But like, that's what you grow up thinking that life is as a kid. And that's what kids are interested in. So if you want to disciple your kids, like, I've never done anything like this, but I started a garden this year. I'm raising chickens. I'm doing some manual, like building labor and stuff like that, building walls and stuff. And my kids are interested in that. But like, my recruiting business, which I make most of my money on, kids aren't interested in that. What are they going to do? How are they going to help me with that? But they could help me, he'll get me that hammer, get me those nails, stuff like that. Right. I mean, that's priceless, man. I love my father. My father was great. But that was something that he was a nuclear engineer. So that's not something that we ever shared, like building stuff and doing that kind of thing. He was a math guy, you know what I mean? And so I just think that there's, especially for Christians and pastors, this is stuff pastors can do, man. Like my pastor is super handy, and like he's all in that stuff. He's got a productive household and all that kind of stuff. And I really respect him for that. I was at his house the other day, and his squash plant looked a lot better than mine. I'm like, well, how'd you do that? You know what I mean?
Dude, AD, I love that you bring up your chickens on every episode. It's like, man, you really are attached to these things.
I can't wait to eat them.
Dude, that's going to be crazy. You think about in the Old Testament, they're talking about how you like bring that one sheep in the house that becomes a pet, and then you kill it. Like, you're going to do that. You're going to teach your kids some serious lessons on sacrifice coming up.
Anyway, good stuff, man.
Yeah, good stuff. So the discipleship part, I really want to nail on, because to me, this is one of the biggest shortcomings in the church today and over the decades, quite honestly. I grew up in the church, became a Christian later in life, but I never saw real discipleship in any kind of practical sense. Now, I did have like pastors who would take the time to listen to me and kind of talk me through problems, but there was never a goal to achieve. There was never any kind of like discipleship context in a work setting, let alone how to become a man and how to engage in culture, how to live a Christian life in business. None of these things. So how do we start in implementing that? Because I feel like that's just like, we don't have any foundation for that right now.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And I think a lot of that, again, it goes back to I think it's really good for young boys to use their bodies, especially at a young age. I look back at the time that I spent working construction, excavation. It's really good for them to learn how to work hard by the sweat of their brow. Like we're made for that.
Yeah.
And particularly at that age, because you have so much unbridled physical, energy. And so teenage boys need that. But what I would say too is it doesn't always have to be you as a dad. I've seen with my boys is men in the church. Like if we have a work day, recently we were roofing, the other dads will say, hey, you come here and you help me with this. And that's good for them to be around other men in an environment of men where they're learning those skills. And the other thing I would say too is that, AD, we're talking about this just a second ago. So I'm a writer by trade. And so I've started my own business, just writing press releases and stuff like that. You don't have to put your name on it. And you can make actually decent money doing that from home and stuff like that. That's a business. That's just one person. I don't employ anyone. It's super, super easy, Matt. You mentioned that. Mm-hmm. But I would say, like for the kids, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to work for me. Sometimes that's not a good idea. What I've really tried to do pastorally and as an elder in the church is, look, find the guys in your church that have skills that could be business owners and say, hey, instead of, I see that you've worked for this electrical union for 10 years. Have you ever thought about starting a business? And I planted those seeds in some people, and it's amazing because a lot of guys will say, hey, that's a great idea. And I just pique their interest and say, well, you could teach your kids how to be an electrical apprentice. It wouldn't be hard, right? And they're like, no, I teach people all the time. And it's just getting those wheels moving. I think part of the problem in the church is because we're so Gnostic, we don't actually think about real physical realities. And those are going to be essential as we're moving the culture forward and taking the fight to the enemy.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. I think it's like we've so long envisioned heaven as this like harps in the clouds kind of a thing that we just attribute all of our spiritualness to that too. And there's, again, no spiritual realness or elements to the physical things that we're doing. My dad has a construction business. He started by himself as well. And so I could relate to a lot of what you were saying. My dad made me work for him in the summers that I wasn't playing sports. And he paid me an experience. It's like, Dad, when are you going to pay me money? I'm paying you an experience, son. And I hated him for it. I was so angry. But I look back at that. And even though I knew I was not ever going to go into construction, my work ethic, how I understood how to handle customers, how to deal with like people giving me a hard time. Because in construction, like you said, no one gives a crap about like the things on social media or whatever. They want you to do a good job. And if you don't, they're going to rail on you. And for a teenager, that's really healthy. When you have grown men that are going to give you a hard time until you do things right, that was some of the best experience I ever learned. And I have an MBA. And I think I learned more about business and how to interact with people, how to work from those days and those summers working, shoveling dirt and working with the construction workers with foul mouths. And just dealing with those kinds of people taught me more on how to be prepared for life than anything education ever did. So totally agree with you on that. All right. Number 3, recruiting others to homeschooling. Are you just a racist and trying to get people away from the public schools? You don't want people to go to school with 80s kids?
I am a racist and a bigot. I'll have you know.
I knew it from the beard.
And a sexist too. No, but I think this is a huge issue. This was part of a conversation. So I've talked to a lot of men through the podcast that I do. And a lot of people say, I love these principles. How can we make differences now? Because look, if you have a positive vision for the church in the future, okay, what does that look like today? And I think one of the areas that Christians can win right now strategically, which hill can we take? I think one of those hills is homeschooling. And the reason I think that is there's a lot of articles, even by pagans out there right now, and they're saying things like, man, listen, I don't want to send my kid to school and deal with all this, this crap about they're going to have to wear a mask and they're going to have to sit 6 feet away from each other. A lot of states and a lot of counties are not sure if they're even going to have public school. And so this is a great opportunity for churches especially, and then the people in those churches to be recruiting actively and saying, look, we have a homeschool co-op. we have this resource, maybe it's classical conversations, whatever it is that you do, and saying, look, you want to change, again, think 4 or 5 generations from now, you want to change the future. Look, the left knows it's through education. And so what we have to do is we have to win our own kids. The problem in the Reformed Church especially is we don't even win our own kids. And a lot of that is public education. So if we can win there, it's very simple. People have started to realize that already because, look, I mean, they've had to be, people who didn't want to homeschool had to homeschool, right? And so now they're saying, hey, this isn't so far-fetched. I can do this. I know in our neighborhood alone, we've had so many moms come to my wife and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you show me how to do this? It is a great conversation. It's a way to bring them hopefully to Christ.
Yeah.
But yeah, to start thinking about, what's going to happen with the future of the kids. And again, if we could win the culture on that, that'd be great. But right now, my concern is, could you just win the church? Could you just convince Christians that Christian children need a Christian education? We would be much more potent than we are now.
Amen to that. I think of that quote from Vodi Bachman, which I can't believe Glenn Beck is platforming that guy. It's amazing. We send our kids to Caesar to get educated, and we're surprised when they come back as Romans, right? It's a super popular phrase, but most of the church doesn't believe it. They are still shocked when our kids are sent off to university and they are hating them and are denying the faith. But the thing is that didn't just manifest in university. That happened in high school. That happened in junior high. That happened when they were told they were animals, that science and studies is the true religion without saying it's a religion. And they've been undermining Christianity and parents from the beginning of their education. And so forget about culture, like your kids. Do you want your kids to go to hell? Because 80% of them are denying the faith in college. Why are you surprised they're Romans?
Yeah, and I think for me, there's a lot of arguments that you can give to people about why it's so important to homeschool. And I mean, if you're in Moscow and you can go to Logos and you got, exorbitant amounts of money, that's great. I just don't think that's where most people are going to fit in. And it's not easy to win people to, $15,000 per kid per year, particularly if you're asking them to have, or you're saying, be fruitful and multiply. So that's really hard. But again, you can win them homeschooling. I think it's easier. But the simplest thing, this is from Doug Wilson, the simplest argument that I say to people, they say, well, why do you homeschool and why do you think it's so important? Well, because in Luke's gospel, Jesus said that the student will become like his teacher. And if the teacher is a statist pagan, what do you think your kid is going to be? So very, very simple. I would rather my kid be a covenant keeper like me, God willing, by his grace. I'd rather them be like that than a statist pagan. It's very simple logic. It doesn't take an advanced degree to be able to understand it. And so just using stuff like that with people and saying, look, what do you want your kid to be like? The state made him a statist. Do you want to keep doing that? Is that a good plan? And again, I don't think it is.
Yeah. So you said that if we could just get the church to believe this, do you have any ideas or thoughts about why it's been so hard for the church to just see this? It's like obvious to us, right?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think it's because it's really hard. So a lot of these principles actually tie to each other. So because your family is in debt, that means that you both have to work. Because you both believe that you have to have brand new Ford pickup trucks that cost $60,000 a piece. Yeah, we're both going to have to work and make 6 figures in order to make that happen. They're sending them to daycare. So it is like this totally different worldview. And basically what it comes down to is people are not willing to make the sacrifices. They'll say things to me like, oh, I wish I could homeschool. I wish my wife could stay at home. Well, she can, but you have to make different financial decisions. I've lived on a pastor's salary and my wife has stayed at home. So for anybody who's wondering, that doesn't mean that I made a lot of money in my lifetime.
You
and
mean
we've
Joel
been able to do
Osteen
it.
pastor, right? Joel Osteen pastor salary.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Name it and claim it. So we named poverty and we've claimed poverty. It's been great. So I think just encouraging people, like, you can do this.
Yeah.
Yes, it means as Christians, look, it's going to be costly, but I think what we're trying to get people to see is the reason you lost a generation. We did not lose this generation last year. We lost this generation 30 years ago when parents sent their kids to public education. So what I'm trying to fill people with is the positive vision for the future. I'm trying to get them to think about your kids in the next 200 years. Look, I'm going to have to sacrifice if I want to see positive things happen in 200 years. But again, I would look at something like the book, and I would say, look, the reason Israel became a political problem in Egypt, first and foremost, in the opening verses of Exodus, is because they obeyed the command to be fruitful and multiply. They were fruitful and they multiplied, and then they became a political problem for Egypt, and then God came and rescued them. So what I tell to people is, look, if you're not going to be willing to be faithful to have kids and then rear them as covenant keepers, how dare you pray for revival and reformation? Because you're not doing your duty. Why would you expect God to do his part to honor you, to deliver you, and the rest of it? And again, I'd say the same thing with turning your kids over to the state.
So let me say this. So you just blew my mind, because I was there's no chance I was sending my kids to public school. That wasn't going to happen. I went there. I know what it's like. So that wasn't going to happen. But you just blew my mind with that logic. And this is the Bible's like this so often. It just gives you something so simple. It's so simple. The student will be like the teacher. The student will be like the master. That's it. That verse should end the discussion right there. It's easy. It's you don't have to have a degree to understand it. And yet it doesn't end the discussion, because I think you hit the nail on the head, Eric. It's difficult. It's hard, and you have to make sacrifices. And so what happens is you end up making these complicated theologies that you need a degree to figure out, that don't even make any sense, even when you have the degree. And then you make these complicated theologies, and then you tell them to people on Sunday, and like the men are just sitting there like, yeah, but it doesn't say that. You know what I mean? But it's easier. It's easier because my wife was telling me about, my son's 5. So this is going to be our first year. My wife's telling me about the curriculum, and she's asking me questions about what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And this is all way more difficult than just saying, okay, just sign me, give me the paperwork. We'll get the injections, and we'll send a kid to school. They'll figure out the curriculum. It's not that it's complicated. It's just effort. You know what I mean? I think that's, you hit the nail on the head. You just blew my mind. And the Bible always blows my mind with its simplicity. It's just so simple.
Yeah, amen. We don't want to make the sacrifices ourselves, so we sacrifice our kids and send them to the state.
And the thing is, this is the other thing too, because you might be looking at me as I go, AD, well, you went to public school and you turned out all right. But I didn't actually. I didn't.
He did not turn out all right.
I did not turn out all right. Obviously, look how crazy I am now. But number two, like this, the amount of just awfulness that went into me getting saved by Christ.
Ugh.
I mean, I haven't told my whole story, but I did a lot of bad stuff. I went through all kinds of things it's totally unnecessary. And a lot of that kind of stuff, I learned how to do that from my friends, my pagan friends who were doing all that stuff. You know what I mean? That's just how it is. And so, you get all these stories. Yeah. What are you saying? It's a sin to send your kids to public school? Well, just look at the logic. It's simple. Jesus said, this is what Jesus said. So what's your argument against that?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. And what I hear most from people is, well, I want my kid to be a missionary to the public school.
Oh.
And there's a couple things about that. Usually the person who tells me that is a Baptist. And so I said, well, first of all, you don't believe your kid's saved, so I don't know how they could be a missionary. So that's a problem.
So you're a Presbyterian. I was
the other level. Yeah. Dunk them babies. But a huge part of it too, honestly, is just, has it worked? like very pragmatically, like has this philosophy of sending my kid as a missionary to the public school. Is the public school system transformed? No, adamantly no. There's no,
Transgendered, not
and
transformed.
again, I don't see any. I see, yeah, right, yeah, exactly. So yeah, I just don't think it works.
Yeah, the logic doesn't make sense. The fruit doesn't make sense, but let's just do it anyways.
But it's easier. Yeah, and I hate to say it that way. I hate to say it that way because it sounds like you're being a jerk, you're judging people's motives, whatever. But the point is though that is really what it is. It's way easier, and that's that. I think Eric hit another point. You know, a lot of families that it's just necessary that the wife work because of the decisions and the choices that they've made. It is what it is. I mean, you got to fix it. Like today's the day to start fixing it, though.
Yeah, you know, I think going back, I thought about this a lot. Going back to what you were saying, AD, about you know, just going through the hard times that we did, the unnecessary times that we did. And there was a lie that was sold to us that what you do as a kid isn't going to impact what happens to you in the future. The porn you look at as a 13-year-old isn't going to affect your marriage when you're 30. The girls that you sleep around with when you're 16, 17, 18 is not going to impact your children and your marriage down the road. And we've thought like, oh, okay, cool. So my actions are compartmentalized. I make a mistake, I say I'm sorry, and it's over. But life is building blocks. And how you build your foundation is going to determine what your home looks like. And so you make all these decisions to go into debt to buy the Ford F-150, which I have, by the way, and that really hurt me, Eric. You buy these expensive cars, you become house poor, and then you wonder why you have this difficult decision where I'm going to have to send my kids to Caesar. Well, you made terrible decisions for the last decade. What do you expect?
Right.
And the thing that's striking me too is that we follow Jesus and we call ourselves Christians and we want to be Christ-like, like Jesus, who sacrificed himself the ultimate price. And then we're surprised when the hard thing requires us to do sacrifice. Like we need to just accept as Christians, if we're going to follow Christ, then we're probably going to have to make sacrifices like he did. That shouldn't become like a surprise, and that shouldn't be a deterrent for us. We should be thinking that's probably the right thing to do if we have to make sacrifices for especially our family. But somehow it's backwards. It's like, oh, that's too much of a sacrifice. I can't really live without these things, so we're not going to do it. God doesn't really want me to do those things. He doesn't want us to live that way. It's like, what are you talking about? The person that we're supposed to live after, to live the life of sacrifice.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing, actually, is just the very basic tenets of Christianity that you're going to have to take up your cross and follow me. One of the things that my wife and I talk about continually is she'll say, or I'll say to her, man, it just really feels like lately everything we do is pushing against the grain of the culture of life. And we'll kind of look at each other and be like, well, that's how you know you're on the right track. I mean, if you're going downstream with the current, G.K. Chesterton said this, if you're going downstream with the current, the only thing that goes downstream is dead fish. So a living salmon is jumping up, and that's a ton of work. If you're going with the stream, you're dead. So, but unfortunately, I think a lot of the church today in America is unregenerate. They're worldly. And yeah, I mean, you're going to have to make really hard decisions that most Christians are not willing to make.
Yeah. That is for sure. Speaking of hard decisions, the fourth point, I can't believe we're getting through this. Planting anti-fragile churches that aren't woke. So are you saying that we shouldn't stay and fight, that we need to get out and just start our own churches? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I definitely think that there are who are going to have to stay and fight. And I don't want to say that there aren't those situations. But I think what I've seen a lot is guys who are either not pastoring, who were pastoring, who got out of the pastorate because they were disillusioned with what was going on in evangelicalism. Like there's a lot of guys basically, I don't want to say standing on the sidelines, but they're not necessarily pastoring a church right now. And I think a lot of those guys are saying, should I wade into my flag, and should I start a church? Meanwhile, I get contacted all the time, especially through the podcast, where guys are like, look, I don't go to church. I've refused to tithe to these churches. They're woke, and I refuse to support the wokeness. And so I think there's a lot of people in the pew or, on their couch because they're not in the pew but they're essentially just hungry for somebody who will be bold and courageous, who will speak to these issues. The most recent, obviously, I think, was the Black Lives Matter stuff.
Yeah.
Man, it was like dominoes. You know, you got the blackout page on their Facebook profile. Pastor Brian Sauvé in Ogden, Utah, we were talking about it, and he said, you know, it's funny because when the coronavirus started, he said we were kind of in a tough spot, but after it's been going on for a while, he said we've had people flocking to our church.
That's right.
Because they are so hungry for somebody who is not going to put up with the cultural BS. There's hardly anybody standing right now against the tide. And so I think if you can be the guy to stand against the tide, the thing that the church needs right now more than any other thing is courage. And so if you can be that guy and you can be courageous, I think now is the time to plant your church, and people are going to flock to you. People are going to rally.
I think this is what I think about this too. And I'm not saying that it's okay to be incompetent, but what I am saying though is courage. All it needs is a little backbone, and you don't have to be the most profound person. You don't have to be like the most charismatic guy. Like all it takes really at this point is to be just the guy that's not kneeling. That's it. You don't have to be anything else.
Faithfulness.
Right. And people will be like, that's okay. I'm down for that. You know what I mean? I was saying this to Matt the other day. I was like, basically any business you want to start, eventually people are going to be wanting the sane version of every industry. So you don't even have to be that great. Just be the same version. And that's it. And you'll get customers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, come to my deli. I don't have a trans woman sitting out front. Come on in.
But no, it's so true, man. It's so true. I listen, I don't get as many emails about that particular topic as you're saying, Eric, but I do get some. And it's just like, you know, what do I do, man? Like I'm in this location, like everyone went woke overnight. And it's like, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I deal with this? And it's just crazy, man. It's crazy.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny too. It's like,
yeah, and the other
Go
feature
ahead.
that I see about this. Yeah, the other feature that I see about it is we've talked to a lot of people who are actually willing to move across the country right now. And so yet another reason, because look, I mean, we have friends in California and they're like, dude, they just mandated that we can't sing and worship, you know? And so I've had guys who work jobs in California and they've said, hey man, I keep getting sent home like every week. Like I'm not getting my wages. I'm tired of doing this. They're talking about pulling kids out of homes, testing everybody. And if your kid's sick, they're going to literally they're talking about doing these things. So people are in that mindset where it's like, no, this stuff is real. Despite what some Reformed pastors are saying right now, there is actually a reason to be concerned. There's real tyranny afoot. In other words, I don't think it's make believe. There's real stuff going on, and you should think twice about the masks and all that stuff. So people are in that mindset, and I haven't seen that in my entire lifetime where people are this ready to be mobilized.
Mm-hmm.
I think you almost need sort of with churches sort of a militia mindset where people think I'm joking on this, but I'm like, no, you and the men in your church need to be armed, and you need to have a plan if the stuff hits the fan. You need to have a plan for what you're going to do in a response, just like you would if you're, you got somebody come in the church with a gun. You need to have a plan.
That's right.
So all of that, I think it's just the spirit of the age where people are starting to wake up, and I think it's really good. So what do you do pastorally? If you're an elder, if you're somebody who wants to plant a church, I think now is the time. This is go time.
Yeah, definitely. And if you have a church, stay open. Oh, there's churches that even would open up with the weird restrictions and they're closing again. And they're saying Romans 13, just go along with it. There's no need to be concerned.
Yeah, that's right.
It's
Matt, let me say this. I've been talking to a lot of pastors locally and also online. And I have to say that the first time around, people were unprepared. And so, things happened the way they happened. This time, it's not going to be like that for a lot of these guys. People are prepared for this next time. And I think when this happens again, because, it's going to happen again,
mm-hmm.
You're going to see a lot more pastors this time standing up to this nonsense. I hope it's true, but that's what I'm hearing through the grapevine.
Well, it's not even when it happens again. We're still in the midst of it. And I think, AD, you and I have talked about this a lot.
Not in New Hampshire. We're living free up here.
Really?
Live free or die, baby.
Yeah, I conflate all those states up there. I don't know what is liberal, what's conservative, who's off the cuckoo's nest. I don't know. But when we were talking about this at the beginning, we were unsure how to respond. We were giving a lot of grace. And, we said our opinions. And if you disagreed, okay, it's a tricky situation. You can't trust anyone, the media and the news, the data and all that stuff. But I'm of the mind, and correct me if you guys think I'm wrong, that we shouldn't be as lenient this time. Like, if you're closing as a church now, I'm saying you're sinning and you need to repent and you need to stand firm in the faith and stop listening to the government. You are mandated by God to issue the sacraments, to lead your congregation, and not just be dictated by the political whims of the government authorities. And you are dropping the ball. You're not being a leader. You're not being faithful. And you're just living your life by fear. And you're supposed to be an example of the opposite. And I don't think that we need to be and should be lenient and give as much grace as we did on the beginning, early February, early March. Am I wrong on this? Am I just being that firebrand kind of person? AD goes dark.
Well, I don't. Yeah, AD went dark. I personally don't think so. I know from dealing with. I know personally from dealing from a pastoral and elder situation, it's true. Like I'm part of a very faithful. The first 2 weeks when this all hit, we were like, "Oh my gosh!" Like we're all gonna die of the bubonic plague tomorrow. Right. This is very serious. But yeah, now at this point, I mean, come on, like none of the tests, none of the experts, blah blah blah. I mean, if I see one more, expert says this, I immediately delete. I'm not listening to that because we know it's garbage.
Right. That's so true.
I think the reality is if you're an American and you live in this country, the way that you ought to interact with the media and the news is like a Russian would interact with Pravda. Okay. Right. This is propaganda. It's straight propaganda. So pastorally, I think, no, there's absolutely no excuse. Now I'll stick in the town that I live in and the churches around us, even some sort of reformedist churches, they've been closed this whole time. Our county has said you can be open, and they have still closed. So I think you're running into a bigger problem. I think it's good. It's revealing what churches. It's revealing who was swimming naked in the sea the whole time, who didn't have courage. But yeah, I'm totally with you, Matt. I think that if you can't stand up now, and you can't be bold and courageous in this moment, man, step down from office. Why are you even in that office as an elder or pastor?
Well, because they're in it because they're so well educated that they know that to stay closed is actually to obey the second greatest commandment. That's what I'm talking about, man. Right. This is they make these complicated doctrines that make no sense even when you have a degree.
Yeah, right.
What is that?
The people with degrees say the stupidest things, especially lately. It's amazing. But despite just from go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say our pastor always says, he said, it's a truth so simple that you would have to have a PhD to miss it.
Dude, that's exactly right. I like this guy. Is this Michael? Pastor Michael? That's a great word.
Yep. Pastor Michael Denna.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is it's not just even like a government freedom issue. It's you have the Marxists coming to destroy us, marching freely on the streets. What kind of testimony is that for the rest of the world to see the Christians cowering in fear? Well, we won't even worship the true and living God, but the pagans are out worshiping on the streets, rioting with no fear whatsoever. But we're making all these complicated arguments, not being open when the government even says we can be open. Like you said,
Matt, you got it all wrong. What the world's going to see is that they're going to see that the church is loving better than all of them. You understand? Like this is about our witness. We got to maintain our witness, and what they're going to see is how much we care and how much we love.
Squish, man.
Right.
Super squish. All right, Eric.
Squish.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Man,
we need to give you some shout outs here. EricConn.com, Hardman podcast, where you talk about bodybuilding and
maxing.
What is the podcast about again?
Bloat maxing.
Bloat maxing. Sorry.
My podcast is about recovering biblical masculinity in a world of softness.
Oh man, we need that more than ever. Can they find you on the social media sites anywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at Eric, ERIC_CONN. That's both Instagram and on the left-leaning Twitter, which I am still on. Haven't been banned yet. And then, of course, yeah, you can find me Hardman Podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast, Castbox, all that good stuff. I'm on all of those.
Awesome. Check out his podcast. Check out his blogs on his website. Follow him on the social media sites. Are you on Parler?
You know I am. I'm on Parler. My handle there is Old Stone Jack. And yeah, I just got on there. We'll see how it goes. But
so if you actually want to see Eric's
good.
post, go follow him on Parler. Thank you everyone for listening. If you want to follow us, we're on Reformgelical on Twitter and on Facebook and on YouTube. Appreciate the subscribe and sharing the show. Thank you for everyone joining us live. We'll talk to you next week. God bless.